Coming up this week on Breaking Badness, today we discuss the mighty sitting ducks. We're talking about a MasterCard DNS error that went unnoticed for years. Next up, a seat at the Script Kiddie table. Threat actor targeted low-skilled hackers known as Script Kiddies with a fake malware builder that secretly infected them with a backdoor to steal data and take over computers. And of course, our fun game, Gold Guidance and Grievances. With that, Breaking Badness is next. Welcome to Breaking Badness, episode 199, recorded on January 27th, 2025. I'm your co-host, Callie, Script Kiddie Hawk Fensel, and with me is co-host Tim. Keep your hands off my malware supply, Helming, and last but not least, Taylor, Tired, Round Robin, Wired, Found Robin, Wilkes Pierce. Welcome, everybody.
Hello. 199. Whoa.
Yeah. We are quickly approaching the bicentennial.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Woohoo.
That's going to be fun. We're going to have a special guest on to talk with us. It's a frequent listener giving us all the thoughts on how we've evolved over the past. We've been doing this since 2019. I mean, I haven't because I haven't been here the whole time, but have you guys been here the whole time?
I was on a little bit before I took my brief detour from Domain Tools, and then I came on again when I came back, which was in 2020.
All right. What about Tay? Were you on the podcast the whole time?
I was a guest host before I was like second or third, fourth best host. A few times, and still talk to some of the former folks.
That's going to be a fun episode. I'm excited.
Me too.
We got a lot of reminiscing to do on that one.
But this is still going to be a good episode. Don't just pause and wait for that one.
Yeah, don't skip this one because It's not the bicentennial. It's the penultimate episode before the bicentennial.
Everyone knows that's the really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't listen to this one, you won't. The plot of the bicentennial just won't make any sense.
It won't make sense. So don't do that. Yeah, listen to this one. This one still has fun puns and starting with the mighty sitting ducks. Been thinking a lot about the mighty ducks recently because I hurt my wrist because I fell on ice, as one does, and I hurt my wrist. And then I was doing that thing that they do in the Mighty Ducks where Emilio Estevez's character tosses the kid who hurt his wrist a hockey stick and is okay, now rotate it, and he can't do it. And I'm like, just that kid, his name is Banks because I looked it up.
You will recover.
I did.
Is that the first time that there was a coordination between the name of an actual sports team and the name of a movie?
That's a great question.
There were movies about sports teams, obviously, but they came out at the same time, I think. The movie came out around the same time that the expansion team came into being.
Yeah, that's a great question that we need to do on a podcast that we keep talking about.
We haven't had a new one of those for a while. I think that we used to be able to coordinate our marketing better now.
Yeah, and now we're just over here. I don't know, but
Utah got a new hockey team, and they don't even have a name, and they don't have a movie.
Well, it was the Washington football team. They could be the Utah hockey team.
Cleveland has a hockey team. It's just AAA hockey or whatever the equivalent is, but they're called the Lake Erie Monsters, and I feel like that name lends itself to really good marketing. There's good swag.
There used to be a radio station in Cleveland. It's not there anymore, but they called themselves the Monster on the Lake. I wonder if that's a nod to that.
Yeah, I wonder what that is because I'm I feel like I know enough lore. I should know about this, but I don't. Now I'm disappointed in myself.
It's look-upable, I'm sure.
I'll do that. But we should talk about the mighty sitting ducks. This comes from a Brian Krebs article, actually. It's about MasterCard resolving an error within its DNS settings that could have allowed anyone to intercept or divert traffic for the organization by registering an unused domain names. And we've talked about this sort of attack or breach before, but...
Hey, wait, Callie?
Yeah.
Was the word resolved there a DNS pun?
Oh, it wasn't, but it should have been.
It is now.
It is now.
Carry on.
Oh man, I did a pun and I didn't even know it. Those are the best ones, maybe. But Tay, can you give a brief overview of how this was discovered for our listeners?
Yeah. So this was discovered by a researcher, is Philippe Caturegli, who we've talked about before, just 7 episodes ago, a friend in DNS to us here on the podcast. Philippe was doing some digging on some of the records for subdomains at MasterCard.com that they used with their Azure services. So it was like az.mastercard.com. And then, hey, here's a list of 5 name servers that we use to direct the traffic to our services over in Azure. So if we're deploying assets there, this is how we get our stuff there. So they had acam.net, like a lot of different acam.net host names. And then they had one where the configuration said acam.ne. So it's just pointed to a .ne domain, which is ACTLD. That sat around for a number of years. We can see that record here. Hang on. Are we allowed to do visual aids?
We're a video podcast now, so you can do unless you're listening to this, then you have to jump over to video.
So this is our typo here, right? So here we see there's acam.net and there's a bunch of other acam.nets. A22-65, A22-66. These are just names that they applied to these host names. But for whatever reason, they did not have the T on the end of the net here. So they have this kind of hanging record there. So my name, these are meant for round robin, so you can distribute the queries across the infrastructure. In this case, we have a found robin where they found this typo and said, hey, I wonder what would happen if I went and registered, because Akamai owns acam.net, but they don't own acam.ne, right? So
I don't think I knew NE was a TLD. That's a new one to me.
Yeah. So
where's that TLD from?
And yeah, it's that's the TLD space there. Now, interestingly enough, it's not particularly easy to register domain names in that ccTLD. So Philippe had to send snail mail off with a check and wait for the record to be created. This is how the country code TLD space, we say this, a bit of a wild west in terms of governance, right? So the countries ultimately are in control of them and determine the processes for getting names in the spaces. Some are really easy and some are hard. This is a harder one. And so he went and said, hey, what if I buy acam.ne? So we could see that he registered it on November 18th, not 2 months ago. As a ccTLD, you don't get a lot of information on the registration details, but we can see that it lives in France. So that tells us maybe that's where our friend here parked it.
And do we know why he was looking into this in the first place? Like, was he tipped off, or like just general research and he stumbled upon it?
Doing research across the different zones and that were tied to these bits of infrastructure that were answering questions, sending things over to Azure.
Okay, cool. And then it's such a small error, but why does it pose such significance?
It's interesting because the level of significance is hotly debated, right? So on one side, we've got clearly, hey, I was able to answer questions about your resources and potentially see who's asking them and where they're being asked from, right? So we saw a lot of incoming questions for bits of infrastructure internal to MasterCard as a part of their deployments for serving customers. The flip side is that it's not like, just because you can see this stuff doesn't necessarily mean that you can trivially impersonate like MasterCard to those customers, right? First off, you're not going to get all the answers. You are round robining. You're one of the robins. And so you're going to see just a subset of the queries, but then your ability to like really do a lot with it proactively may be limited. So that's the one side of it. The flip side of it is, yeah, but I'm now peeled back bits of your infrastructure that you probably didn't want me to have access to. And I can also start to stand up other resources like this. This is a surface scratching thing. And in this particular case, because what was being imitated was a name server, you're able to see name server stuff. But if this were tied to a mail server or tied to a G Suite account that no longer existed and you bought it and stood it back up, then you can get inside the infrastructure that was prior there, so that you might be able to use that stuff for malicious activity. So that you can definitely see both sides of it. In this case, there was just a ton of traffic that got directed over to the infrastructure that our researchers stood up here. I won't go into it, but we could see where it went. And you can see that there's a domain that like is now in the top 100,000 for DNS query. So like clearly there's a lot going to it. It shot up the charts internal to us.
So in this particular example, so you mentioned like it's more of a problem if it's a mail server. This is a misconfigured DNS server involving a subdomain. Does that play into the debate of the
usefulness?
Yeah.
Potentially, yeah, but it's a pretty busy one, right? So hey, all of our stuff in Azure, that's a pretty big surface area. Again, there's just a little back and forth in terms of potential impact, but I think that there's a case to be made for, hey, you've got to take this stuff seriously. Maybe there's some limitation in the scope, but we didn't. There could be other servers that are misconfigured in a very similar way. In fact, Philippe said that there were other things calling to it. Maybe there was a misconfiguration in like documentation for Azure 5 or 6 years ago or something, and that's just persisting. There could be a lot more just like this lurking out there. This is not particularly super unique.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, our friends at Infoblox actually wrote up a blog post about sitting duck attacks. Would you say this qualifies as that?
Yeah, I think from there, a lot of the stuff that like they're sitting ducks, there's a lot of different flavors of it. I'd say this is
à l'orange.
Yeah, a lot of different ways to cook that sitting duck. You could stack this up there. Some of theirs are even more trivial in that you don't have to go and send $300 to a random TLD operator and hope that the registration goes up and you can start to see things. Some of it is just, hey, let me go to a name server operator and pay a bill that hasn't been paid in a little while and see if I can use that to redirect traffic. Certainly variation on a theme there, yeah.
Okay. What would you say the takeaway from this whole research would be, like that our listeners should consider moving forward?
The devil's in the details. When you're big, the details are like all over the place. And when you've been around for a long time, that historic footprint is very large. And I think it's definitely worth taking stock of what your DNS footprint is historically. Where have you been? How are you presenting yourself in DNS? Because it's visible and can be stored and found and used against you.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Taylor, for walking us through that. We are at the point now where we'd like to talk about the hoodie rating we'd assigned for this. So if you're a newer listener, once we talk about our articles of the day, we like to assign them a hoodie rating from 1 to 10. So first of all, if you can picture the stereotypical hacker in a hoodie, we like to go from 1 to 10, 10 being absolute chaos ensued, like the end of days type of thing, and 1 being this is not so bad, just something to keep an eye on, we can go about our day, not that big of a deal. So Taylor, since we just heard from you, Tim, after having heard all this and read the article yourself, what are you thinking hoodie wise?
There's a way in which you could do this one as goodies or hoodies.
Yeah.
So the goodies aspect is the research that Philippe did here, which is really cool. And also that he's not a malicious actor who captured this erroneous DNS misconfiguration and therefore the traffic. So it's good that he was not a bad guy. So in that sense, it's a goodie. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the hoodie aspect of these sitting ducks type attacks in general. As Taylor kind of pointed out, if you own DNS for something, you own a lot. And there are a lot of things that you can do if you are able to, and we see a couple of different ways that this happens maliciously. One way is when a malicious actor gets a hold of a domain that expired and then registers it and starts doing nasty things with the traffic that was supposed to be going to the victim organization. And another way is that they actually take over the DNS credentials, like perhaps the victim organization didn't use the strongest authentication on their DNS with their registrar. And so they can get a hold of it that way. But either way, if you own the DNS for something that's a big juicy target, then you have a lot of power in that. And you mentioned subdomains. If you own the registered domain, then anything that's a subdomain of that, you get to put that on any infrastructure you want. So in some cases, there's not a lot of subdomain oriented traffic, and in some cases there is a lot of that. So it just depends on what the victim organization has set up. But the takeaways here are there are 2 big things in a organization's outward facing attack surface that expire. One of them is domains and one of them is certificates. You really have to have big old alarm clocks on both of those, because in both cases really bad things can happen if the wrong person gets a hold of that object. or it can at minimum be a nuisance if they expire and you didn't realize it. So have big old alarm clocks on all those things. Now, of course, I understand that's easier said than done. There are huge organizations that have massive numbers of these things, but they also have pretty big IT and security shops. They've got the horses to deal with it. But anyway, so looking at DNS takeover type attacks as a category, that's like a potentially 9 to 10 hoodie event. If it happens to the wrong domain for a victim organization, it can be a real lights out kind of scenario.
Oh, that's intense. I'm glad we didn't get to that for this.
Oh yeah, me too.
Taylor, do you feel similarly? I guess we're talking more it's more hypotheticals since.
For sure.
Yeah.
One thread I wanted to pull on very briefly here, just because it was talked about in the article, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about historical stuff as it relates to this. So the researchers mentioned that this was not the first go around for this. Krebs mentioned, hey, that this domain had been registered prior, back in 2016, 2017 timeframe. And Domain Tools absolutely caught it, got that data. Hang on, let me find it.
Are you going to share your screen?
More visuals.
Oh yeah, I got a bonus slide, y'all. bonus slide. This is interesting. First off, it's really important to note that the MasterCard records have no overlap with this, right? So there's nothing, this is not a MasterCard thing. This is just an ackham.ne as a domain. What has it done? Where has it lived? It was registered back in 2016. It was stood up and utilized Yandex name servers. So it's a Russian provider, service provider, like Google, a lot of tech services there. And we caught a interesting SOA record, so that -i-delo at yandex.ru, we interpreted in as an SOA and reverse pivoted off to a handful of other also really old domains. And there's one with a high-ish risk score there. It's like a .cm domain there, so some other, ccTLD activity, but not like a bunch of 100s or smoking guns or anything that would lead you to light the alarm bells or anything. But interesting that it was up, that but we could see between 2016 here and 2018 the 57,639 cache misses on the Farsight sensor network there,
which means there were really more in real life.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah,
but as a relative indicator, that's fairly busy.
That's pretty busy, yeah, especially for something that left no other real trace out in the wild. So yeah, that's your bonus from a hoodies or goodies perspective. Goodies abound for Philippe. Thank you. Goodies for all those who would dare to maliciously register old domains.
So that level of traffic does imply probably that there may very well, in fact, I would say there probably are other organizations besides MasterCard that had that same missing T on acom.net, and that's what was responsible for a lot of those lookups.
Yeah, one help desk article is all it takes. Yeah, so I think hoodies perspective, I'll go like 6 or 7, somewhere in that number, 6.5, 6.55, 6.55 hoodies. Yeah.
Perfect. So we are going to talk about a seat at the Script Kiddie table. So we're talking about a threat actor targeting low-skilled hackers who are known as Script Kiddies with a fake malware builder that secretly infected them with a backdoor to steal data and take over computers. So that sounds like the plot of a movie. So I know I went into thumbs down for sure, Taylor. I went into it a little bit, but it's a term I hadn't heard before. Tim, can you expand on what Script Kiddie means? Is there more to it than just young low-skilled hackers?
That's a pretty good summary of it, and it's a very old term. I remember hearing people referring to Script Kiddies when I first got into InfoSec around 2000 or so. Yeah, it goes way, way back. And there's always been this idea that in hacker world, and this could apply to malicious or to more gray hat or white hat hacking, but either way, if what you're mostly doing is downloading scripts written by other people, learning how to use them off off YouTube or something like that, and then deploying them yourself, what have you really learned about hacking? Maybe a little bit. And it doesn't mean necessarily that there's any, by the way, if that's how you're learning to actually code for good, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. But there's always been this kind of looking down the nose at people, especially if they portrayed themselves like on forums or whatnot as having mad leet skills and turning out to really be more of a script kiddie. So That's the idea.
So basically, these more experienced hackers are not helping inexperienced hackers come along in their hacking journey.
Not in this particular case.
No, that's sad that they don't have that sort of mentorship program.
Dad trombone, yeah.
So is there money to be made in attacks like this, or what would the purpose be in targeting script kiddies?
Yeah, so that's interesting. And it's funny because in the old days of widespread hacking starting to really take root, in the early days of what I'll call the consumer internet, when it stopped being the DARPA and academic thing and started being a commercial and consumer thing, it was not uncommon for a lot of hacks to largely be done for the lulz, for bragging rights, or just because it was funny. And it wasn't always as financially motivated as it generally is these days. Now, in this particular case, there are a couple of possibilities, and that does seem like one of them. It's just poking fun at script kiddies, but it also, could there be some financial gains? Absolutely. This Trojan, so to talk about the Trojan, to go into this in just a little bit more detail, what the script kiddies thought they were downloading was a malware downloader, or a rat remote access Trojan called Xworm. And that is malware that takes advantage of or exploits the Microsoft .NET framework. And it allows a lot of the various sort of Swiss Army knife features that you might expect a multi-purpose rat type worm to have. So it can be a keylogger, it can be a screen grabber and pull browser data and all kinds of different things like that, right? What happened in this case is that script kiddies thought they were getting a hold of Xworm so that they could do their own exploits. And in fact, the tables were turned on them. It was exactly building a backdoor into their own environment. So where does the financial aspect come in? Certainly, if you have backdoor access and you have screen grabs and key logs and all that stuff, then certainly you might be able to get access to assets that belong to the victim that you got there. And just because somebody's a script kiddie doesn't mean they don't necessarily have assets that could be of some value to grab a hold of. I think it's safe to say that is probably part of the motivation. And also, honestly, I think the author of this probably did get a chuckle or two out of it as well along the way. But that's the idea. And I know I skipped ahead to your next question, Callie, but yeah, it's a rat that the unsuspecting script kiddie didn't realize was going to rat on them.
We are our own best amusement too.
They lied about Xworm?
What? What's next?
Well, I know you did jump ahead, Tim, and that's totally fine. Do you want to expand on the Trojan and malware in this attack? Like, is there more you want to share about that?
I mean, the article that we are linking to in the show notes, in turn, itself links to an article by CloudSec that talks more about it, and that's worth taking a look at. If you want to understand Xworm itself, if you Google it, there's a really good and detailed write-up about it by the folks at the Polish cert.pl. So look for that article if you want to go deep on how it works. But basically, it is similar to a lot of commodity remote access Trojans. One of the things that's interesting about it is that Xworm doesn't work really hard to obfuscate some of its details. So it was not really challenging for them at cert.pl to reverse that malware and learn what it did. But it doesn't do anything really groundbreaking as far as rat malware. It does, one of the other functions of it that I didn't mention is it can encrypt all of the data on the victim machine. So there's a little ransomware for you. Not the most sophisticated ransomware in the world, but
it gets the job done.
You could do the canonical ransomware things of encrypting the data and or exfiltrating it so that you can put it up for extortion. So it certainly has some utility for malicious actors, and a good one for good guys to learn about in their labs and so forth, to understand a bit about how some of these exploits and malware variants work.
Excellent. Gotcha. So you had mentioned CloudSec was the research team that looked into this. And this article also explains that they disrupted the kill chain. How did they go about doing that, or do we know those details?
Yeah, so that's interesting. It's interesting to begin with that the author of this malware put a kill switch in it. But basically, by the way, I will go into a little bit more detail about the Trojan that I forgot to mention before, which is that where it does the data exfiltration and command and control, et cetera, is over Telegram channels. And they were able to take advantage of that and set up basically a Telegram bot that could harvest the unique victim IDs of the infected hosts. And basically, they were able to go through all of the machine IDs that they were able to get out of Telegram logs from this thing. And then they also just threw in machine IDs from 1 to 9,999, just for good measure, to catch potentially others. And so in all of those cases, they ran an uninstall command. So it was then uninstalled from all of those victim IDs. No particular details on who the victims were. There's not really anything about the victimology as such, but it was removed from all of those. Now, of course, these are script kiddies. So I don't know, are we happy or sad that it got uninstalled from the script kiddies machines? I'm not sure, but it's just an interesting story. Some of the infected machines may have avoided having the kill switch if they were offline at the time that was running. Or there are some of them that may remain compromised out there in the wild. And some of them, Telegram does do some rate limiting of messages. So it's also possible that some of these uninstall commands that the researchers were sending out could have been caught by that rate limiting and not delivered to the infected hosts. The infected hosts, by the way, were all over the place, but predominantly Russia had the most. US came in second and India came in third, but Russia by far had the most infected hosts in this case. So a lot of script kiddies over in .ru.
Gotcha. So what are the takeaways that our listeners should have coming, like after having heard this? What would you say?
I chose this story partly because honestly, it's amusing. We use the trope all the time, no honor among thieves, and that is the headline of the article about this. It's fun to see bad guys going after each other. I guess the takeaway is do your homework on the source of anything that you're downloading. Whether you think you're downloading malware or you think you're downloading goodware, make sure that you're getting something or just write your own. Yeah. Right. And you can start off as a script kiddie when you write your own, just to develop your own skills beyond that. Yeah, no, don't do that for malware, please. Mostly this is an amusing story and a little bit of a cautionary tale for all of us in terms of trusting or making sure that the source is trustworthy when we're going to grab stuff off Git or wherever we're grabbing it.
Yeah. And it feels like this is like when we talk about like hoodies as it pertains to this story, it could be a hoodie or a goodie. It's another one.
I'm going to give it one goodie, one chocolate chip with a little bit of cinnamon goodie, just for the entertainment factor.
And in terms, do we need to go into a hoodie rating for this?
I don't think, I guess the closest thing to do for that would be for our listenership, it would be to assign a hoodie rating maybe to the X-worm Trojan itself. And it is, I think at this point, as I mentioned, it's pretty commodity. So I think most of the security controls that I think probably most Breaking Badness listeners have in place are going to have pretty good detections for this. There are a lot of Yara rules that will detect it pretty readily. I think a lot of gateway and host protections are going to spot it and prevent it from being installed. So I don't think there's a lot of extraordinary measures that your typical SOC or managed service provider or anybody needs to take specific to X-worm. So I don't know, I'd call it maybe 3 hoodies. I feel like that might be being generous at this point, but we'll call it that.
Fair enough. Tay, do you feel similarly?
Yeah, that seems, I guess if you hire a lot of script kiddies, like, I don't know. I was thinking of like top 5 signs that like you're a script kiddie and you need to take ibuprofen. If you know what the floppy disk icon
is one of them.
looks like. You know what that means? What happened to like the script kiddies grow up to be like spreadsheet adults and other deeply philosophical questions? I think 2.5 hoodies.
Okay, excellent. All right, we have been brought to the end of the show, but before we leave, we like to do what we call gold guidance and grievances, which is pretty much what it sounds like. We talk about something good, any guidance we might have, like any marching orders, instruction, anything helpful, and of course, anything that's bothering us. And we do them in reverse order because it's better to end on a good note than a low one. I think we've been discussing before we hit record on this that there's a lot of grievances lately, and that
How does one choose?
How does one choose? How does one not stay bummed out? Yeah, it's just a lot going there.
Paralysis of choice. Is that what that's called?
Analysis paralysis. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot. So I'm just gonna let Taylor figure it out.
I think we're going to pick just one thing. The stuff that like the disbanding of a bunch of CISA boards that were overseeing the different hacks of the typhoons of our telecoms, I think is deeply concerning, but let's hope that the dust settles and this stuff reconvenes and that work can get done.
Yeah, that's fair. You can move on from there to like your guidance gold.
I've got a guidance and a gold. It's just a story that I found interesting, which is just crime doesn't pay. There's the DOJ's indicted like 5 folks for working with North Korea to place fictitious workers at companies. They're shipping these folks laptops and they were facilitating all of this stuff. And deep into the affidavit is like these folks got paid like 80 grand and 40 grand. And this is super crazy. The prison sentences are going to be wild. Like I've never has crime doesn't pay fit more than that and than I've seen in a while.
Nice.
All right. Cool. Tim.
How
should we do by stuff?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that about grievances. I'm just gonna go meta here and say there are too many grievances for me to pick a grievance, and that's my grievance. For my guidance, though, one of the things that's going on is there's currently a halt to U.S. foreign aid on cybersecurity and assistance there. So what this brings up is just the importance of private type partnerships and cooperation among folks in industries and whatnot. So my guidance is see where you can extend a hand of assistance, whether it's in a trust group or some kind of a professional association or whatnot, for sharing of security information and threat information and whatnot. Though your ISACs or certs or whatnot, they're really important, and the private partnership aspect is going to have to carry a heavier load probably than it did in the past. So if you are a person who has the ability to make some decisions or have some influence in that area, I would encourage you to look for how you can strengthen trust groups near you. And then my gold, which our colleagues at our company already may know about internally because I shared it around, but there was a really good AMA on the Reddit cybersecurity subreddit from a CISO talking, and actually there was a sort of a little panel of 4 of them doing this AMA, but talking specifically about, hey, I've built a pretty successful program and instantiated a lot of metrics around it. And metrics and KPIs are notoriously one of those things that's really hard to measure. If you go to pretty much any security conference, you're going to see at least one talk about metrics and how to deal with them. And so I thought there was a lot of insightful questions and answers on that. We can put that link in the show notes, but check that one out if you're curious. I think it's with a lot of these AMAs, when it doesn't just become fun bleep posting, there can be really insightful questions. And sometimes the questions are more fun to read than the answers to them. But it shows a lot of folks are really interested in this topic. So go check it out.
Awesome. I think you both handled the grievances with aplomb. So good for you.
Good thing that the next time we're on doing this, probably everything will have cleared up and it'll be hard to find anything to grieve about, right?
I know. I feel like, we'll be out of a job. Like, because everything will solve and we won't have anything to talk about. Of course.
This is, of course, because we're all about to be cryogenically frozen and we're going to wake up in a utopian future state.
Dang.
Mm-hmm. Where we still do this podcast.
I hope so. I love doing this podcast with you both. But thank you for sharing your gold guidance and grievances. Thank you for coming to the table with your articles and sharing your insights. It's always very appreciated by myself and our community. So and of course, thank you to our listeners. Thank you for coming back and listening to us week after week. And of course, we are coming upon our 200th episode. It's going to be a very special one. Stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, Of course, come back again for an all-new episode of Breaking Badness. We can't wait for you to join us again. Thanks, everybody.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.